Trudy Morgan Cole, and my Christmas reading today is taken from my novel, That Forgetful Shore. The time is 1921, and we are in a little community called Missing Point, which is fictional, but very similar to the real community of Coley's Point, Newfoundland. And I guess this piece requires a little bit of setup. It's about one of my two main characters in this novel, Triffy Russell. And she is a married woman. Triffy's a bit of a discontented woman in that she was very smart, wanted to go on and get an education and leave her small town, but instead she ends up kind of stuck there, married to a fisherman, which was the fate she had hoped to avoid. And she's very active and involved in the community, but her greatest outlet for her questing and curious mind is religion. And although she is a good, staunch Church of England woman, she falls in with the Seventh-day Adventist missionaries when they come to town and is part of founding their church. And then later begins going to the Pentecostals when they show up. And at this point in the story, which is just before Christmas, the Anglican minister has come around to speak to her and tried to correct her on her theology, and she has told him off. And so we're coming in at the end of that scene. His diatribe degenerated into a complaint about how fewer people were coming out to church since the war, which trailed off into a whine about the difficulty of raising money for poor relief. With Christmas approaching, people expect the church to do something for the poor, but the money simply isn't there. Now, 'tis not that hard, Reverend Triff says. We need something like a sale of work. The children are having their pageant at school before Christmas. Why don't I talk to Mr. Bishop about putting off a sale the night of the concert? I'm sure he won't mind, and then I'll talk to some of the women and see what they can contribute. I'd say a nice few people would buy little things for Christmas gifts, and then we'll use the money and maybe some of the goods that don't get sold to make up a few boxes for the families that need it. By the time he left, the minister was calling down blessings on her name, forgetting that he'd come to warn her away from dangerous heresies. Triffy considers skipping over Clara Snow's house in her canvas of the point, but she's never been one to take the easy way out. She brings her children, Katie, Grace, and Billy, along as a sort of bodyguard when she goes over to the north side to face Clara in her den. Katie Grace is doing a dialogue with Clara's daughter Lydia in the concert. As Triffy sits down at Clara's kitchen table and her children are absorbed into the noisy crew of Snows, she hears Katie's voice raised above the rest, ordering Lydia to practice lines with her. Above the din, Triffy explains her errand. You must have some time on your hands, Triff, to be going around stirring up the rest of us to do good works. Clara hands her a cup of tea with such poor grace that some of it slops into the saucer. Haven't you got enough to do with your husband and your youngsters and 3 churches to run? Triff bites back a retort to the effect that there are worse places to go on a Sunday morning than to church. One of the worst kept secrets on the point is that Clara Snow goes out to Jabez Badcock's ramshackle house at the end of the point on Saturdays when Obadiah Snow has gone cutting and hauling wood. Officially, she goes to clean for Jabez, but the mister been inside that place and he tells me there's precious little cleaning ever got done there, Aunt Rachel once told Triff, with lowered tones and raised eyebrows. Jabez is as much of an odd sock as ever. He lives alone, though there are always rumors about him and other men's wives, of whom Clara is only the latest. Jabez fishes only when he pleases. He won't play the fiddle at dances or concerts, but will sit for hours playing it on an empty stage head. He's drunk more often than he's sober. Triffy can't see the attraction, but for a woman like Clara, it's possible there's some romance to be found in a solitary, dangerous man like Jabez Badcock. Triffy does her best to ignore Clara's jibes and swallow her own dislike of the other woman, long enough to get a commitment from Clara for a dozen crocheted doilies for the sale, which is also long enough for Lydia to get bored of practicing with Katie and Katie to stamp off in frustration. Prying Billy loose from the snarl of little boys in the yard, Triff goes home, reasonably satisfied with the list of contributions she has managed to collect. She puts in extra hours, knitting and crocheting, on top of baking for Christmas, helping the children learn their lines for the pageant, and repapering the kitchen and parlor. She's worn out by the night of the concert, but sits proudly to hear Billy recite a poem and Katie outshine the other girls in her dialogue. Then Triff slips out to the other room to set up tables for the sale, listening to the other concert pieces through the open doorway. The performers are mostly school children, but near the end, Chara Mercer gets up to play the accordion and sing "The Boys from Newfoundland." Hardly a Christmas song, but everyone gives Char, with his wooden leg, a bit of leeway. He's well on his way to becoming as good a singer and storyteller as his old Uncle Jed was, and he often sings about the war, though he talks about it only to tell funny stories. He never describes the horrors of battle or speaks of the death of his two best friends. The older students continue the patriotic theme by getting up to close the concert with God Save the King. And then parents crowd into the room to examine the items they and their neighbors have contributed to the sale. Triff, standing behind the table of fancy work, rejoices in one of her favorite sounds, the solid clink of coins falling into a money box. People contributing to a good cause, thanks to her hard work. When the crowd departs, she's left to clean up. The Reverend thanks her as she hands in the heavy money box. As she sweeps the floor and packs the unsold goods in a box, she hears her husband Jacob John and a few other men in the next room putting back the desks. She doesn't pay much attention to the men's conversation till she hears her own name. "You must have your work cut out for you keeping up with Triff," says Fred Mercer. "She don't stop, do she? If she not getting up a sale at Workshire, she's starting up another church." "Nah, sure, I don't bother her about that. She can get up to whatever old foolishness she wants," Jacob John says. "The good Lord got his hands full keeping up with Triff. I don't suppose he needs my help." The other men laugh, but Obadiah Snow persists. "Even so, bud, these holy rollers are a bit much. I heard the minister had to have a talk to your Triffy, and she still haven't stopped going over for their meetings. She'd be raising up a crowd of them around here next, falling down on the floor and talking gibberish. You don't want the likes of that going on in your house, do you?" The men's rough laughter is quieter now, the challenge to Jacob John's authority no longer veiled. Out in the classroom, a moment passes before he replies, and Triff feels the gathering tension, imagines the men looking at him for his answer. Finally he says, "Well, oh boy, here's how I looks at it. Some women, right, whenever they gets restless, you gotta watch out for 'em. Woman gets restless enough, she's liable to be up to no good behind your back. But when Triff's gone out late at night, I know she's only down on her knees praying." This time, there are not chuckles but guffaws. Triff knows she ought to feel sorry for Obadiah Snow. Or even for Clara, for Jacob John has said one of the things that's never said aloud, charged Ob publicly with having a faithless wife. Who knows if Ob might be the kind of man to make Clara suffer in private for that public shame. But what Triff feels is a swell of pride, or maybe gratitude. She puts away the broom and closes up the box, then turns to see she's not alone. The teacher, Joe Bishop, has entered the room. "Grand concert, sir," she says. "Katie's got your gift for recitations," he says. "She's a clever girl, coming along fast. All the children did well, really," he adds, then glances over his shoulder to the men in the other room. "You've got a loyal husband there," he says, "as well as clever children. You're a lucky woman, Triff Russell." The men have finished putting the schoolroom to rights, and Jacob John has the children collected outside the door when Triffy comes out. Joe Bishop locks up the school and says goodnight, walking away in the other direction. "You did a fine job tonight, Katie Grace," Triff says, taking her daughter's hand as they head back down toward the south side. She doesn't want to praise the girl up too much to make her vain, but she knows what it's like to grow up without ever having heard a word of approval from anyone in your own house. She won't have that for Katie Grace. As they walk home through the clear, cold night, Jacob John beside her, she ponders Joe Bishop's words. "You're a lucky woman, Triff Russell." She is not accustomed to thinking of herself as a lucky woman. Her best friend Kit got the charmed life, while Triff got the blighted one, cursed by poverty and ill luck, never to go to school or become a teacher, never to leave the point, married to a man she never loved. Tonight, though, she thinks of Jacob John cutting down Obadiah Snow in her defense. As they turn onto the road that leads to the south side, and she sees the bay spread out before them, she tucks her free hand into the crook of Jacob John's arm. Katie holds her other hand, chattering away with excitement, while Billy is almost asleep, draped over his father's shoulder. Jacob John glances over at her with a half smile and tightens his arm a little, squeezing her hand against his side. "Now what's that for?" he says, under the rise and fall of Katie's voice and the rush of the waves. "The road is icy. I don't want to slip," Triff says. "Fair enough, maid." Thanks so much. I'll be back tomorrow with another reading, and until then, Merry Christmas!